Welcome all. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today to learn about CTDL education and employment outcome metrics. My name is Jared Diener. I am Director of Accounts and Publishing at Credential Engine. I'm joined by Jeannie Kitchens, our Chief Technology Services Officer. And I know we are also joined by a number of our colleagues at Credential Engine who are in this webinar, so I'm sure they will introduce themselves in the chat. But please, everyone, drop us a line, introduce yourself, who you are and where you're coming from. That would be great. And as we move forward, please don't hesitate to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat, and one of our colleagues will get to those. We will also have time at the end of this webinar for some Q&A. So we would love your questions and comments as we move forward. So this is a quick agenda rundown of proceedings today. I'm going to start with some quick introductions. Then I will turn it over to Jeannie to give an overview of the CTDL education and employment outcomes metrics. Then I will take it back and we will discuss how to publish these outcome metrics using our bulk upload option. Then, as I mentioned, we'll have some time for Q&A and then some closing comments. Just to quickly introduce Credential Engine, who we are and what we do. Credential Engine is a nonprofit whose mission is to map the credential landscape with clear and consistent information that fuels the creation of resources that empower people to find the pathways that are best for them. And we accomplish our mission and vision through the items that you see below, by building common infrastructure and language, which is what we're here today to really talk about, that common language and the infrastructure for publishing and making this data available. By collaborating with our stakeholders, and by empowering our partners and empowering, ultimately, learners and workers who can have this and use this data to make informed decisions. So Credential Engine, we use technology to map the credential landscape. We transform credential information into linked open data so that it can be shared, connected, and used across many different applications. It starts with the Credential Transparency Description Language, CTDL, which we will talk about in detail today. This is a linked open data schema that describes over 1,100 different characteristics of credentials, skills, jobs, providers, outcomes data, and much, much more. So common language, linked open data schema. It starts with the CTDL. We take data in CTDL and we publish it to our credential registry. Publishing is the term that we use for adding this data to the registry. Credential Engine has a suite of publishing tools that will transform the data that has been staged in CTDL into linked open data that is in the credential registry. This credential registry then is a cloud-based open source repository of all of this connected credential data that has been published to the registry. That data in the registry then, and this is the final column on this graph, can be used to power any number of applications that make this data actionable and that bring it to the people who need it most so that they can make informed decisions about their education and career choices. There are a number of different types of CTDL data, and you can see that represented on this slide. These are kind of the top level, what we call classes of CTDL data. And you can see we will be focusing today on outcome metrics. It's highlighted there on the top, in the top right column. But you can see there are a lot of other different types of data that can be represented in CTDL. All right, I'll turn it over to Jeannie to talk about education and employment outcome metrics.
Yes, thank you, Jared. And it's so wonderful to see so many people joining us today. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the chat so we can address them. And, we'll pause a couple times in the webinar as well, in case anybody wants to raise their hand and unmute. But first, what I'd like to do is give a little background on the education and employment outcomes metrics that we are focused on today. The CTDL and the registry have actually supported this type of data for quite a number of years now. But what happened recently in 2024 is we felt that the metrics could be better supported by the CTDL, that we really needed to beef up our model to address both very simple use cases for simple metrics and more complex use cases. And that was accomplished with a task group. And some of you may have been members of that task group. And we implemented the revised model based on the outcomes, excuse me, from that task group. So what we've accomplished, as I said, is what we feel is a much improved modeling of the data beneficial to publishers and consumers of metrics data in CTDL structure. So when we were setting out to work on the update to the model, which is in effect, and that's why we're all meeting today, because our publishing supports that updated model, we had two very high level use cases. One is simply the use case to be able to find data sets and access them as a whole, and to represent the data within any given data set as is intended. For example, many times when we're looking at metrics, certainly like on top of a spreadsheet or on top of a database, you could use things like Tableau or other things to get visual pictures and graphs. But very often in the end, this type of data is in some kind of a table. So we wanted to model the data in a way, so let's say you were to consume the data, you would be able to consume it and basically generate the intent of that data like as a table. And we'll be able to see that in the credential finder. And along with those high level use cases, of course, there were many, many other detailed use cases, and those were covered as well, but I wanted to, make it clear that those were the two primary. And as a reminder, at Credential Engine, we do not deal with individual level data. So we don't deal with PII, but if your system does, you can still use CTDL in your system. So I'm sure all of you joined this webinar because you have, some familiarity of some sort with the various types of education employment outcome metrics. And this is just a few examples. I could have had a whole entire deck with, lots and lots and lots and lots of samples of metrics. And maybe you all have some that you think are really interesting metrics that you would like to share, and you're welcome to do that in the chat. But you can see here on the screen the different types of representations that we typically see with metrics, and these specifically came from that task group work that we did. So when we're working on this type of data, we're actually working with real world data as well as aspirational data. So what we want to do is make sure that when data is published as CTDL for these metrics, it can be discovered, consumed, and represented. So let's get a little nerdy here. Since all of you joined this webinar, I have to assume you have some interest in metrics. And as you know, metrics can, are numeric values. They could be percentages and, all kinds of mathematical equations behind those metrics. So let's take a look at a picture here that's going to explain the way that the CTDL works in handling these metrics. So you can see this picture here on the left-hand side of your screen, and at the very bottom left corner, an organization And, you know, it could be a state agency or some other entity. It doesn't have to be the credential offerer. They can publish data about, say, a credential or a learning program. In this case, we can see in this diagram that a credential organization in the bottom left corner is publishing this data, and it's going to be about a learning program. But this is just an example. It could be a credential, it could be a course, it could be several other CTDL classes that could have a data set profile. And what happens is the publisher will have a data set profile, and a data set profile describes a single set of education and employment outcome metrics. And each data set profile, which is that circle in the middle there, will minimally have a metric and at the top left and at the bottom right, an observation. And a metric is what describes what is being measured. So you could see here, this is literally like an example, a metric of a completion rate, and the metric has a description. And the observation is the numeric value. So if we go to the next slide, here's how we can remember this. What do you want to use to describe the data set? Well, that's going to be your data set profile. That's going to define what all of the metrics and all of the observations in a data set. A data set may only have one observation and metric, or we often see data sets that have, you know, more than one. They could have 50 combinations of metrics and observations. And then what is the definition for something that is going to be measured? That's the metric. So we want to define it. You have to know what a completion rate is for anyone to be able to utilize that information. And then what is being the measured value? That's the observation. So that's kind of a little cheat sheet to remember how these three core pieces of the model work. And for many cases, that's all you need with the CTDL model, or these relationships here. But if we can go on, we can get more complex. I'm sure that all of you have seen data sets that have what we call in CTDL dimensions. And yeah, one more time, because I'm missing something in the bottom left corner. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have seen data sets that look something like this. And again, this is an example here where we have a data set that has a metric of a completion rate. It has an observation, which is that 80, and it has dimensions. And in this case, the dimensions are gender, a period of time, because we could see that this data is repeated in 2023, 2022, 2021, there could be 2020, and so on and so forth, and a type of program. So there are many examples of data with dimensions, and one of the kind of obvious types of dimensions is demographics. So when we can also handle more robust types of metrics that have these dimensions. So if there are demographics or other factors that affect the observation, those are dimensions. And we can just kind of parse this out a little bit, just like we did in the prior slides when we were looking at what's in a data set. We can take a look here and we could see this top piece of a diagram here where we're identifying our data set profile. What is this data all about? Let's describe it. And within that data profile, the various metrics and observations, and you can see here that it is a completion rate, and there's an observation that is 80%. And if we can go on down to the next slide. Here's where we start to bring in the dimensions. So literally each dimension is a defined point, and literally we have a property called has point. And so we're able to essentially link an observation to the specific dimensions that would have definitely had an impact in the calculation of that metric. So this diagram is showing that. So it's showing you that just below the observation in the dataset profile, in the middle there, we have a dimension type of learning program. And in this case it's the accounting assistant. And that is the point for this observation. So we know this observation of 80% is at one point is a learning program that is accounting assistant. And then the next dimension point just below that is a called a concept scheme. And we're not going to go too weedy today. But the important thing is to know that with the CTDL, you can also have a level of granularity that you define with your metric. So in this case, this metric is also based on not only an accounting assistant, but the male population that participated with that learning program. And then finally at the bottom, we can see it has a basis in a period of time, and that period of time is 2023. So all these fancy pictures are in our CTDL handbook for those of you who really want to dive more into the specifics of the updates to the model. And we can share that link to that section of the handbook in the chat.
Jeannie, it looks like we have a question from Paul Adams, who has raised his hand. Paul, do you want to come off of mute and ask the question?
Great. Hi, Paul. And if not, you could always...
I apologize. I was looking at the chat instead of, and I accidentally raised my hand. So thank you. I'm really enjoying the presentation, but I've got nothing smart to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. No worries. If
Thanks.
anybody has a question, raise your hand.
Please do.
We enjoy questions, don't we, Jared? Bring them on.
Absolutely.
All right, you want to go ahead and move on?
Yep.
Okay, so that is the modeling behind it. Jared is going to get to the point where we're in this presentation. You're going to see how that translates in particular to uploading these kinds of metrics using CSV files, which is kind of a natural thing because usually when this kind of data is created, it literally is at intersections of columns and rows. So, but with that said, we have the Credential Registry Publishing System, and it is a full suite of tools that is for taking information from various sources and, converting it into the CTDL linked open data structure. Now, this slide is showing you all of the options that are available, and the green highlighted rows are relevant to what we are discussing today. Jared is going to show you the bulk upload, but we also have partners who can publish this data directly through our API from their structured data source. And we also have capabilities for ingesting CTDL JSON LD that, can be published to other people's web pages in a way that we can literally ingest it. So those are what the publishing options that are available as related to CTDL metrics. And the data in the registry, is put in the registry and modeled in a very specific way to power other people's applications, systems, web tools, AI powered, applications and so forth. So there are a number of options for consuming data from the registry, and metrics, all of those options are available to consumers of data that want to incorporate metrics or utilize metrics. Now, certainly at Credential Engine, we've heard from many researchers who like to use data in the registry. So there are many different use cases for consuming this type of data, whether it's in some kind of student-facing, product to help students understand the metrics, related to, say, a credential they want to earn, or if you're a researcher, interested in studying the data. All of the consuming options are available for consuming metric data from the registry. And that is why every one of these rows are highlighted in green. We're not going to deep dive into consuming options today, though, but if you are interested and you want to put a note in the chat, we would be very happy to talk to you about that. And there are a number of resources. For example, the Search API link in this deck also includes a query example that's been added to our guidance site. So if you are a technical person, you know how to write queries, we do have information available that you can look at. And I am going to pass it over to Jared. If anything that I talked about raises any questions or comments for anyone and you don't want to raise your hand, please do put that in the chat. We love questions.
Absolutely. Please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you, Jeannie. I'm now going to turn to a little bit of the nitty-gritty, how to get this data into the credential registry. I'll try to keep it as high level as possible and not rabbit hole too much. This data can be quite simple or it can be quite complex based on the data that you have that you would like to make available. We'll keep it fairly simple for the purposes of demonstration. That'll at least give you an idea. So we're going to focus on publishing outcome data by bulk upload. That is probably our most common method for publishing this type of data, as Jeannie mentioned. Broadly speaking, publishing outcome metrics data with the new schema that we are rolling out today involves two steps. You publish your information about the metrics first. That is a separate bulk upload template spreadsheet that you will add to our credential publisher tool. And then you follow that up by publishing the specific outcome data that points to the metrics that you published in the first step. I want to guide you to the text box at the bottom of this screen. There is a link here to detailed instructions that we've provided on our Credential Engine guidance site for how you can follow this process of publishing your metrics first, and then publishing your outcome data second, and then approving everything and viewing it on the Finder. One of the things I want to point out in this process, this two-step process, metrics first, outcome data second, is that with the metrics, when you add that information to the credential publisher, each of the metrics will be assigned a CTID. This is a globally unique identifier for that specific metric. You will then use those CTIDs for those metrics that you uploaded in step one in the step two when you add your outcomes data. Those will reference the metrics that you added in step one. So just want to point out that part of the process. So looking at metrics, bulk uploading metrics by using a template spreadsheet, this is a list of some of the required and then optional CTDL terms or properties that you would use to describe the metrics that you would like to upload and publish to the registry. So you can take a look here at the required terms. At the bottom of the screen is a recommended property called metric type. It's not required, but highly recommended. It will allow you to specify the type of metric that you are uploading, whether it be earnings or employment. And we can see on this screen that we have articulated a list of metric categories that can apply to the metrics that you would like to upload and publish to the registry. And you can use the link that is provided on the slide here to look at these metric categories in more detail, look at their definitions so that you can select the metric category that most closely aligns with your metrics. Moving on to the outcome data bulk upload, that's the second part of the process where you will stage a spreadsheet with data for upload. There are columns or fields in the bulk upload spreadsheet really for three kind of main things, but there are some additional things that could be added as well. The first is the dataset profile. So these are CTDL terms that describe the dataset that you are publishing. Second is the dataset time period. So making reference to the time period for the dataset profile. And the third are observations. and those are the numeric values that are associated with the metrics. Every dataset profile will have at least one observation. And taking a quick look here at some of the required and recommended or optional terms for the outcome data. You have a set of required terms here at the top for the data set profile. And there's some additional optional terms here that you could select if you so choose. At the top of this slide are terms that you could select for data set time period. Optional, but recommended. And then at the second half of this screen are terms that can be selected for observations. Required is observation of. This is where you would add that CTID that I mentioned earlier for the metrics that you have uploaded. And then there are some additional observation terms or properties that you can add as well. All right, so I'm going to give a high-level overview of the bulk upload process for both of these types of resources, the metrics and the outcome data. This is very high level. Right after this, I'm going to do a live demo in our Credential Publisher tool so that you can see what it looks like when you're actually in the application. But this is just a high-level overview of the process. So we're at that step one. We're going to add our new metrics through bulk upload. You would navigate to your credential registry account. You would use the bulk upload tool to upload your metrics. You would approve your metrics. And then when everything is approved and published, you can view it in the Credential Finder application. Digging in a little more deeply, and we'll see this in the demo here in a few minutes, when you are in the bulk upload tool in the Credential Publisher app, you will see the full list of CTDL terms or properties that are arrayed in front of you, and you would select the terms that you would like to populate. Then you would download your template spreadsheet. You would bring up that spreadsheet, you'll fill it, populate it with your data. Then you would upload it as a CSV file to the bulk upload tool in the Credential Publisher. It's kind of a basic standard process. The final step, anytime you add new or update information to the registry, is that you need to approve it. This is what signals to our publishing team that this data is ready to go, and they will go in and publish that data, and it will go live into the credential registry. So once you have uploaded your new metrics data, you will navigate to the organization summary page in the Credential Publisher. You'll select the metrics tab, and you will approve those new metrics. Okay, you've uploaded some new metrics. Now we're down the road a little bit and you want to update those metrics. This is, again, high-level process for how you can update these metrics. You log into your account, you download the existing data from the registry in a CSV data file, you update your data in that file, you upload it to the bulk upload tool, prove it, and then you can see everything that's been updated in the Credential Finder. So digging in a little bit more to how you would update, you would navigate to that organization summary page in the Credential Publisher. You would select the Download Data tab, and beneath that tab, you will see a number of options. For metrics, you would select the Download Metric Data Summary tab, download your CSV data, make any changes to that, save it, re-upload it to the bulk upload tool, and then just like we did for new metrics, approve that data, and it will go to the Credential Engine publishing team, who will publish it. All right, we've done step one. We've uploaded our metrics. Now we want to do our new outcome data. Same process, so I won't spend as much time on this. I'll go through it relatively quickly, and then we'll get into the demo. Again, same process of going into the bulk upload tool, selecting your properties, downloading the template, filling it out, uploading it. Then you go back to the organization summary page and you approve those new outcome data resources. Similar process for updating. Once you've got those new outcomes data in and you want to update them in the future, You would do a similar process of going to the organization summary page, selecting the download outcome data summary button. You'll download the file. You'll make updates to your data. You will upload it to the bulk upload tool. And then you'll go back into your organization summary page. You will select the outcomes tab and you will approve those records, and then they will be published. Once all of that data has been approved and has been published, you will then be able to view that in Credential Engine's Credential Finder app. This is a free-to-use resource for anyone to view any data, any and all data that has been published in the Credential Registry. And we can do that if you're in the Credential Finder app, and there's a link that you can go to right there. You can search for outcome data, and that will bring you a list of all of the different sets of outcome data that have been published to the registry. What you're looking at here are data set profiles for different sets of data published by Pennsylvania State System of Higher Education. So that's one way that you can access and find this outcome data in the registry. Another way to do it is because this data is connected, you can view the outcome data by clicking on or finding the resource for which the outcome data is pointing to. So I can find a credential that has outcome data, and I'll be able to see in the Finder that it has an outcomes data button. And I can click on that, and that will take me to the outcomes data for that credential. So it's another way that this data is all linked together and can be viewed in the Finder.
Hey, Jared.
Yes.
Before we go on, I do just want to mention, and we should definitely put a link in the chat to the Finder and directly to the outcomes data in the Finder. And I do want to mention that the Pennsylvania data, or the PASHE data that we're seeing here, is real data. It's published to the registry. It is based on the model that we went over and the upload process that Jared has explaining. So a big thank you to all of our partners and to the Pennsylvania team for joining us today.
Yeah, big shout out, Jake, Natalie, and everyone at PASHE for supporting this project and this work. Okay, so let's have a look at a demo of how we can get this information, the metrics and outcomes data, into the credential registry, how we can publish this data. So I am in the credential publisher. I've logged in and I have gone to my organization summary and downloads page for my organization. So I'm going to start this two-step process by clicking on Add New Bulk Upload at the top. And then under the column Bulk CSV Upload, I'm going to select Metrics. This will take me to the bulk upload tool that has been selected for metrics data. I will then be able to see all of the available properties that are required or optional that I can then select and download a template spreadsheet, populate that with data, and then upload it to the registry. So it is working its magic to bring up the bulk upload tool here in the publisher. Here we go. So we are in the metric bulk upload tool here at the top. Before you get started, it's always a good idea to make sure that your organization is selected. In most cases, it will be pre-selected, but just make sure that you check that that is the case. I've done that here. There's an introduction section at the top with some guidance and instructions that you could read through. A link here to instructions on our guidance site. So just pop down. So I'm going to move down here to step 1. If I want to change or edit or add any information about my organization, I can do that here through this tab. It's just a nice little option if you want to make any organizational augmentation. I'm not going to do that at this time, so I'm going to skip this step and go on to step 2, select your properties. So we are going to select properties for uploading new metrics. I will expand the first tab here. These are the required properties for metrics. There are 4 of them here. Because they are required, they are pre-selected here in the tool. So you do not need to select any of them. They will automatically be populated in the spreadsheet template that you download. So there are your required properties. We'll scroll down to recommended benchmark properties. For metrics, there is one recommended benchmark property, and that is that metric type that we had discussed. And here you can see the full array of the metric categories that you can select from. So I am interested in adding this property, so I will select that to include it in my template. Then finally, there are additional optional properties that you could choose from if you're interested. I'm going to choose adjustment and earnings definition and income determination type to include in my template. Okay, we are done selecting our property, so we'll move to step 3, where we download our template spreadsheet. There are a couple of options to include sample data directly in the spreadsheet if you'd like to see what that looks like. You could also include instructions for each of the properties that you have selected directly in the spreadsheet for easy reference. I like to do that. It makes it easier when I'm filling it out. So I'm going to click on both of those options, and then I will download my template spreadsheet. Step 4 is to populate your template spreadsheet. So I will bring this up here. This is the template spreadsheet that I have downloaded with the properties that I have selected. You can see here on the first row, these are all of the CTDL terms that I have selected and the corresponding columns where I will enter in that data. The second and third rows include those sample data and instructions. I selected those options before I downloaded the template. And when I start filling out and populating this template, each row will be an additional metric. So one row per metric as we go down. So here's what that would look like. So I'm keeping it simple in this demonstration, a simple upload. I have added 2 metrics. We are required to enter an external identifier for every metric. Even though this says external, it's actually not something that is public in the registry. It's just for internal record keeping and matching. This external identifier can be any combination of letters and numbers that you want. I have selected metric 1 and metric 2 because that's easy. Then I've included the names of my metrics, median amount, employment rate, descriptions. This column, publisher, that includes the CTID for my organization because I am the one that's publishing. My organization is publishing these. I have included that metric type property and selected earnings and employment. And then there are a couple other columns here that can be completed with information. So I'm done here. I'm ready to upload this. This is my metrics data. So before I download this, I need to delete column A. This is not important information. It's extraneous to the registry. I'll also delete rows 2 and 3, the sample data and instructions. Those are not needed. So I would delete those first. Then I'll go and I'll download as a CSV file. I will go back to the bulk upload tool. I'll go to step 5. I'm going to upload the data that I just populated in my template. I'll select that CSV file. It'll come up here. I can preview the data if I want. It comes up in this table here so I can see what it looks like. Then when I'm ready to upload, I will click this button, save this data to the publisher. I'm not going to do this now for this example, but this is what you would click when you're ready to upload the data. Once your metric data has been uploaded, your final step, as we mentioned earlier, is to approve your metrics. So I would click on the organization summary page. That will take me back to this landing page where I can go click on the metrics tab. I can see the metrics that I just added, select all, and approve them. Okay, I'm done my metrics. I'm going to move on to my outcome data. I do want to make note of these 2 CTIDs for the metrics that I just published. I'm going to use those in my outcome data. So I'm going to copy these and I paste them to another spreadsheet or just a safe place for keeping. so that I have those for my outcome data. Similar to what we did with metrics, I'm going to go to the Add New Bulk Upload tab, and I'm going to select, instead of metrics, I'm going to select outcome data. And this will take me to a very similar screen to what we just looked at, the bulk upload tool, but this time selected for outcome data. You can see it's the outcome data bulk upload tool. I'm going to make sure that my agency, my organization has been selected at the top. Introduction information, just like on the metrics bulk upload tool. Step one, reloaded here. Step one, to complete your organization, I will skip that step and move to step two, select your properties. All right, so for new outcome data, I want to start first by expanding this instructions tab. So this has really helpful information about how you will populate this outcomes data spreadsheet. It's important to note that this data is going to be provided on multiple rows, and that the type of data for a row is indicated by the component type. So we'll have one row for a data set profile, one row for a dimension if we are using a dimension, and then additional rows for the observations. And we'll see what that looks like in the bulk upload template spreadsheet in a minute. Then there's information below about each of those component types, and then the row pattern. All right, basic information. It's helpful to read through before you begin. Then, similar to what we did with metrics, I will expand the required properties tab. I don't need to select any of these. They're pre-selected for me and will populate in the bulk upload template spreadsheet. I will note these are required properties for the dataset profile. So everything that is selected here is for the dataset profile. Similar here with recommended benchmark properties, I could select some additional properties for my dataset profile. I'm not going to include a dimension, so I want to make sure that that is not selected, but I do want to include the relevant dataset for. That's important if you want to be able to connect this to a specific resource that has been published, such as a credential, to indicate that this outcome data is for a credential. Also going to select the source. And I have a data suppression policy, so I want to include that as well. The next tab is for dimension. So if you are including dimensions, you would read these dimension notes at the top, important information here before you get started, and then all of the available properties to select from. I'm not going to select any dimensions because this is a simple example here, so I won't be including dimensions, but here you have all of the available properties for dimension. Then I'll expand the observation tab. So an observation, at least one per dataset profile is required. Some important notes up here about the observation. One thing to make sure that you're aware of is that for an observation, the only required property is observation of. So I'm going to make sure that I have selected is observation of to be populated in my template, because that's an important element. Is observation of is where you will reference the metric that you uploaded in that previous step. There's some other properties here. I'm going to select comment, median, and percentage to include those in my spreadsheet template. There's information here on time periods. So there are some notes here that you can read through. For me, I'm going to select dataset time period start date, end date, time interval. And then there are additional properties here, optional, that you can choose from. And then if you want to indicate information about the dataset distribution or the dataset service, you can expand those tabs and select the relevant properties. All right, I've selected everything that I want to include. Same process. I'm going to include sample data. I'm going to include a row of instructions. I'm going to download my spreadsheet. And then this is what it's going to look like. So these are the different properties, the CTDL terms that I have selected in my bulk upload template. So I'm going to fill out my template. It's a similar thing. So I will explain in more detail what this looks like. So remember earlier, we talked about the importance of component type. This is what specifies the type of data that each row contains. So it's going to start with information about your dataset profile. And then these columns next to the dataset profile are referring to that dataset profile. So this includes a name. I've called this workforce outcomes data for BS in biology, a description, the data provider, that is my organization. This field will include the CTIDs for the metrics that are being referenced in the dataset profile. We are working to make this automatic in the future. So this may at some point not be something that needs to be completed, but for now, you would include those CTIDs for those metrics. Here you would include the external identifiers for the observations that you're using, data set time period information, time interval. I've chosen not to include anything there. And this, then I've highlighted this field here. Let me bring this a little bit closer to the center. This is that relevant data set 4. So this is outcome data for a BS in biology credential. So I have included here the CTID for that specific credential that will connect this, this data set to that credential. Okay, so we have looked at information on dataset profile. Then underneath each dataset profile is where I will add information about each observation. Median earning, these are made up external identifiers. They can be anything, but this is an observation for median earnings. This is an observation for employment rate. And then as you scroll over, you get past the columns that you use for the dataset profile. And then you will find these columns here. And you will see in the description, it starts with observation. This is an observation column. And this is where I put the metric that is being observed. So in this field, I will connect this observation to the specific metric that it is referencing. And then I can add additional information and the values for this observation. And then I've got a second observation here. So I put the metric for that observation, information, and then the values, okay? And then just so you can see how this is structured, so I've added one data set profile here with 2 observations. I have more data that I'm going to add. So here's my second data set profile with their observations. And I can continue to go down and add data set profiles and their corresponding observations until I've captured all of my data. So that's how it's structured. I'm done here, got my data. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to download it as a CSV file. I'll go back to the credential publisher. My data is populated. I'll go to step 5. I will upload the data like that. I can preview it here if I want to. I am ready to upload it. So I would click this button here to save the data to the publisher. Once it has been saved and uploaded, I will go back to my organization summary page. I will navigate to the Outcomes tab. I'll select those and I'll approve them. Okay, so there's a demo of how this works. Again, full instructions on how to do this are on our guidance site, which is linked in this presentation. Okay, questions? Let us know what questions you have. Raise your hand or just chime in if you have a question or a comment or like some clarification.
Yeah, if you have anything you want to put in the chat, go ahead. Otherwise, feel free to raise your hand. And you know, we are accessible. If you contact us because you're interested in publishing or consuming this data, we are going to follow up with you. So yeah, if you're, you know, wanting to do either one of those scenarios and you just don't know what your questions are yet, let us know once you know what they are. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Jared, and nobody is raising their hand. So
well, let's move forward. We will share our oh, we have a question.
The value proposition for adding metrics. I think the value proposition for consumers of the data is certainly that transparency of including the, metrics about resources like credentials, and doing it in a way that is reusable and scalable and repeatable. So I think those are some of the key kind of reasons for using the CTDL and publishing those metrics. There's a lot of metrics out there, as I pointed out earlier on a slide. They're all over the place, but they're not necessarily reusable or machine readable, and scalable in whatever format they were published. Or they might just be like content on a web page, or you may be seeing it through some kind of like a Tableau type graph interface or some other type of interface. So what we want to do is make sure that there is a solution for human and machine readable data about resources such as credentials that is reusable and scalable, and can be published and consumed, by really any kind of an application. Eliza, if I didn't quite get to what you're asking, let me know.
Karen also had her hand up. Karen Sullivan.
Karen, hello. Karen, did you want to ask a question? Maybe it's an audio connection issue. Let us know in the chat. If you do have a question, we do welcome folks to go ahead and raise your hand and unmute.
Any final questions for the, oh, hey, Karen.
Oh,
no worries.
You feel free, Karen, if you would like to put your question in the chat. If you don't want to, fine. If you do, we are happy to address it. And in the meantime, what's next, Jared?
Hey, it's Karen.
Oh, hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen.
Yeah, how are you guys?
Good.
So when the Department of Labor example that was put up from the New York City Public Schools, that's proposed outcomes. Is there any place here where they can post real outcomes? Though that data is very difficult to find, I understand, but I think there's a distinction there against here's what should be the outcomes and here's what the reality is. Have you had any conversations about that?
That data is associated with a very specific project, Karen, and I'm sorry, I'm not prepared to answer that question, but we'll definitely follow up with you in the New York team. I know one of my colleagues at Credential Engine is working directly on that project, and I would say that if that specific metric is a metric for what is desired, that would, should be defined with the metric, and it's still a viable metric. But certainly the publishing supports the latter scenario that you talked about as well.
Yeah, that's because I opened up that link thinking, oh, I'm going to see some real data. And I'm like, oh, no, it's the proposed outcomes, which if somebody's trying to compare credentials from several different providers, the same credential across several different providers, how would they identify which is the best option based on the real-time outcomes? So I think that'll be something for the future.
Yeah, definitely, Karen. That's really good. And as part of what the CTDL does is that linking. So once in the future there is additional data about, those specific programs, and if they're attributable to, identifying very specific credentials or learning programs, all that data can be linked together so it's crystal clear exactly which programs, have these resulted in these metrics. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Any other questions? All right, well, a couple of final comments here. Please start publishing. The publishing and consuming options are available. So there's information here on how you can log in and where you can find guidance for publishing and consuming. The email at the bottom of the screen is to our publishing team, so feel free to email us anytime if you have questions about this process or just want to get started. We monitor that email account regularly. And then finally, here are the contact details for Jeannie and myself. So feel free to reach out to one or both of us as well. If you have questions, we'll be happy to engage with you and talk you through this process and support you all in any way that we can.
Mhm. Thank
Jeannie, I
you.
think
Thank you
that's-
everyone for joining.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for participating. We'll send this recording and notes out in a follow-up email. Thanks, everyone.